Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Picture of Success podcast, a show where we speak to outstanding mid-career professionals who are on their way in making their mark by pursuing their passion and purpose. And in this show, we'll be diving into their dreams, aka Picture of Success, and their journey or process that they go through to achieve clarity to propel their dreams forward. And today in this show, I have Nazaruddin Nikki Abdullah. Naza here is what we call a culture architect, certified solution focused coach, licensed NLP practitioner, passionate storyteller, and a lifelong learner. Apart from that, Naza is also an eloquent public speaker, having become Toastmasters national champion for a couple of times. In the organization, Naza challenges the norm and make excellence as part of culture and a new normal. Welcome to the show, Naza.
Thank you so much, Yazid. It's always a pleasure to be talking to a friend who have not spoken to, I think, since the COVID began. So what an odd opportunity to finally have a conversation with you on your podcast itself.
Thank you very much. Sometimes I do this podcast so that I can speak to my friends as well. To get in touch. But, you know, I've known you for more than 10 years. And I've known your background and where you come from and so forth, like Naza, right? But for those who don't know you, you have a very unique background for those who know you, right? And your background is actually what molds you to this amazing person you are today. Now, for the benefit of the audience, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your hobbies, and your passion?
All right, so I guess let's address the elephant in the room first, which is my name itself. So I'm actually a small town boy. I was born and raised in Kuching back in the 80s. So at the age of 10, my mom divorced my father and remarried a Malay man. So in a scheme of buy one, free one, I was the free one that came along with it. So I converted into Islam. So therefore, the name Nazaruddin Abdullah. And I've been in Kuching for the past 18 years, until I finally graduated high school and I left for Japan for studies, thanks to Petronas Scholarship. And after being in Japan for 6-7 years, I came back to Malaysia and I've been working at Petronas for the past, like as it said, that's where we met, for the past 11 years. So that's a little bit about myself. Hobby-wise, I guess I've always loved stories. I've always loved storytelling, something that I believe can help an individual to escape the reality of life. But also sometimes it allows you to frame the past as well as give yourself a new narrative so that you can move forward to the future in a more confident and with more conviction.
Right. I can see that you actually can articulate your stories quite well, actually. And I do see that you use stories to actually enforce the narrative and also to reframe the perspective, right? And actually that comes from your passion itself in telling stories, right? Can you tell me how did that journey started on telling stories, and how did you use your personal story, you use your innate craft and skill in telling stories to become the Malaysian public speaking and national champions a couple of times?
So I guess growing up, I've always been labeled as talkative and someone who likes to speak out of turn. And coming from a Malaysian education system, which is very traditional, the usual response to that by teachers is you go stand outside. And trust me, there were days when I stand most of the time outside class versus inside class itself. That whole thing changed when I was 15 years old, I think. And there was a few teachers that came into my life and they were mostly English teachers. And right. This English teacher told me for the upcoming exam, just for the essay section, just write whatever comes to your mind. Just write things you're passionate about. So I started writing stories, fiction stories. And what surprised me was just by being myself and being able to express my imagination and talk about things that normally people will see as talkative, I actually got a good grade for it. That was when I began to wonder to myself, hey, maybe there is something here. Maybe you can do this full-time, you can do this and people will praise you for it. So I repeat that again when I was in my 20s, and this time around it was for a television competition. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with Media Prima. Right. So Media TV3. Prima organized this, TV3, TV1, TV3 and TV7.
TV7, yeah.
Yeah, TV7, right? So Media Prima had this competition where they asked individuals to submit something called the big idea. So I submitted a big idea, and the big idea essentially was a story of my life. So I talk about a convert and the struggles that a convert goes through as an early youth, as an early adult, as a young adult, sorry. And surprisingly, they liked the story. They paid me, they paid me quite a amount of money to fly back from Japan to Malaysia to present the story to them. And the story turned out to be a hit with them, and they actually gave me the championship for the idea competition. So that was when I realized if we actually take stories and we position it correctly, no one's story is a boring story. Everyone's story has a place in this world. It's just really about how much effort are you willing to put in to tell it to others, as well as how do you harness and sharpen your skills to be able to convey it in the most vivid as well as entertaining way possible. So that's what I did. So I was very lucky, Yazid, that people liked it. I saw that people liked it, and I continued to perfect it. And here is where I am today.
I like the part where you actually use your own personal stories to actually convey something that people would like to hear. And I do believe that it takes a bit of time for you to actually craft that and ensure that, you know, it's something that is authentic, but in the same time, that's something that's likable as well. Can you tell me just generally how that process goes through, and how does that apply in your career?
Yeah, so I guess I'll answer the first part of the question first, the process itself. One thing I've learned about storytelling is that every story has its place in time. Like, for me, coming to terms with my childhood was something that I processed for quite a while.
Right.
It was only in my young adult life that I decided that maybe there's two narratives to the story. One narrative is the one that you are sidelined or you are often picked on because you are different from others. Another narrative potentially could be because you're different from others, you have a unique story to tell, and therefore it is an opportunity and a gift. Now, coming terms with the second narrative allows me to do some form of self-coaching where I deep dive into the second narrative, and I began to see events in my life slightly differently. And I began to choose events that reinforce that second narrative. And as you all know, history is nothing but a selection of events, right? You tell history through a selection of events, and every historian has a certain perspective that they put on to skew the story towards a certain narrative. And that's what I did also. So when I select those events that for me reminds me of the gift and opportunity, and I put it together into what we call a speech. And the moment I start presenting it outwards, it became some form of a self-affirmation where the very act of saying it out, telling the world this second narrative, your brain begins to comprehend it as the truth. And your brain begins to welcome it as a new narrative. And it's such a beautiful feeling that you get, right? When you are able to redesign your past, you're able to reimagine something that has been hurtful to you to become this wonderful memory and a strength going forward. So that's the first part. It's really about recognizing that everything has multiple narratives.
Right.
You have to choose one narrative that allows you to grow as a person. Sometimes it's a positive narrative, sometimes it's a negative narrative, but it allows you to come to terms with it. It's about looking back and being honest with yourself and looking through your whole storyline and choosing the events that you feel you want to feature, and then the act of projecting it outwards. Because if you just put it in your head and never convey it, it's never a firm narrative.
Right? Lose away, right?
But you just lose it away. So every time you tell stories around it, it becomes more and more real to you. So that's the first part. And how does this affect my work? Is that I began to see how this is applicable not just for my own personal stories, but for example, when I work with company leaders in terms of shaping the narrative of change. If you leave it to the people going through the change itself, they may be seeing things through certain lens.
Right.
And the lens they go through may be, oh, this is happening to me again. This is going to be hurtful.
Because their history and background, right?
Correct.
And the capacity of people don't want to change in the sense.
Yeah. So it's the whole confirmation bias that you see as something true, right? So instead of the many narratives, a person may just see the first narrative, whereas the bosses or the leaders of change may be seeing a second narrative. where, oh, this is going to be a paradise, we're heading towards this beautiful world and everything is great. But often that story is just residing with certain individuals.
Right.
So in my work of change, I take that same approach and say, okay, the very principle of change is everyone needs to agree on the starting point. So we make sure that we have a story that captures where we are, where we want to go, and how we're going to get there.
Right.
So when you're able to bring that whole narrative and tell that same story to as many people as possible, it becomes easier, where the whole team now is moving together versus
collective memory,
every
right?
individual. Correct. It's the group IQ, the concept of group IQ, right? When everyone has the same information, everyone has the same skills, everyone has the same vision, the group IQ increases. So that's what storytelling and change does for me. And apart from working with companies and leaders, I've also tried in my own coaching. So I just pointed out that I do coaching as well. When I work with clients, typically I will do this concept called visualization, where sometimes we bring them back to the past and imagine the future, imagine their strength. Sometimes we bring them to the future and imagine their storyline 5 years from now. So it's actually very handy. So I'm very blessed that storytelling has infused nicely what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Right. And that's actually one thing that I recognized when you were speaking just now, right? You've got a history, you've got a story from your personal self, and it depends on what stories and what perspective that you want to see. Do you want to see yourself as someone weak, as someone being oppressed, or a story that unique and you've rise through the ashes and become this majestic bird and stuff like that, right? And I like the fact that you actually use your strength, you use your strength to actually emphasize further in terms of your personal and career life, right? But Naza, if you think about it, I'm sure you have never thought, as being an economics graduate, right? You've never thought gonna be your storytelling skills are gonna be the one that defines your career, right? How did that happen, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've debated in my early years of my career is, do I have to choose a certain path? And I was very blessed because one of my close friend of mine here, she said to me, maybe, just maybe, Naza, your path forward is not the conventional path as everyone else. You may not be an engineer, you may not be an accountant, you may not be an economist. Maybe your path is a unique niche where these different things converge.
Right.
Like, for example, economics in its essence, right, is about cost and benefit analysis on why people do the things they do. Even at the macro level, countries understand how do you increase interest rate or reduce interest rate to have that cost and benefit so that people spend. So it's the same concept of economics. So understanding cost and benefit is one strength that I have. The second strength is the storytelling, the ability to bring narratives together to move people forward. And the third strength I felt like I am is the people person, where the ability to relate with people rather fast and also a general likeness to people. And the field that I am in currently now happens to be one that blends the three into a perfect mold, which is a culture transformation space or change management space. The ability to understand that everyone behaves from a perspective of cause and benefit, the ability to tell story to move a person forward, and the ability to bring people together on a journey. So that's essentially what I do for a living. So I guess it's that crossroad, like Yazid, where I think if you're able to find that crossroad, right, you find that no one else can come into your space and compete with you because it's so niche. The best economists can't compete with you because they may not be a good storyteller. The best storyteller can compete with you because they may not have economics training. And the best coach can compete with you because perhaps theirs is more process-centric and they may not know as much change management as you do. So the ability to find a unique space that you play, and I think that's where globally we're heading towards now, where really, who knew fusion food would be such a big hit? Who knew jazz rock could be a thing, you know? So things are fusing together quite well. So it's all about that, finding your own space. And I think that's where success lies actually for all of us moving forward.
Right. I like the fact the other way you're trying to say is that you yourself as a product, and you need to find in the marketplace of jobs and talents your unique selling proposition, right? Your unique selling proposition is a blend between certain skills and strengths and experience that you have to actually deliver something no one else can replicate, right?
Yep. it's back to the Ricardo approach of competitive advantage, right? So what is your competitive advantage? If you know it, then you sail ahead. If not, you'll be pedaling with all the board paddlers at the same space, and you'll just be hitting pedals.
Right. And it does seem that you already are very clear with your competitive advantage, your unique selling proposition. And the fact is your passion and career are actually beautifully converging together, right? And you've used your transferable skills to gain the necessary work that's required for you in areas of consulting and mentoring. So now that you've achieved a lot, right, Naza? I mean, you are still quite young in a sense. We are all young in a sense, right? But you've been a toastmaster champion. You've been a culture architect. You are being a mentor. You are doing certain things in area of consulting. But what's next for Nazaruddin Niki Abdullah?
Oh, I love that question. It feels I'm having career coaching with you now. So for me personally, what's next is number one is I recognize I'm very lucky to have found a space that I really love, and I'm able to do it full time. So from this point onwards, it's really about experimenting.
Right.
Because what the skills that I must admit, when you go out there, right, and you do this, you realize there's so much that the playing field is so big. Like personally for me, I've grown up in oil and gas and to a certain extent marketing because of virtue of what I've been doing. Petronas is more a marketing portfolio. But when you go out to the real world, there's small, medium enterprises, there's social enterprises, there's underprivileged communities, there's all sorts of other playing field that it becomes this exciting place for you to try and error and just experiment. So that's one, is about experimenting in different fields. Because as an individuals, right, if you are able to find places where you can apply this further, it further enhances your capability, but also more importantly, also allows you to network further.
Right.
The second, I think, is also about finding partners, because as you grow older in life, you realize, oh, perhaps there are other complementary skill sets that I am lacking that I may have to work with others to achieve certain goals.
You can't be good at everything, right? We need to know our strengths.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you need to figure out who's on the table, who's at the table with you, right? So for me, I bring students to the table, but it cannot be a table for one because it's just lonely. So you need to find other people at the table. You need to get to know them. You need to, okay, for example, for my space now, ESG is something that's coming big. And change management ESG is something that no one's talking about. So getting to know green finances, getting to know people in that space who has been doing this in and day out. What motivates individuals in that space is something interesting to me.
So the fusion of change management plus sustainability.
ESG,
yeah.
Correct. And also,
change is always going to be relevant, right?
It's just where you apply, right? Like agile practitioners, how do you not infuse change with agile? Because if you're running in sprints, right, change management typically is very waterfall approach, very like project management approach. It takes about a few months before you can do change management. Now, as people run in sprints, how can you shorten the change management activities to fit in 3 weeks boxes? How do you time box it? So all these components, there's just so many people at the table. You need to have conversation with these individuals, and more often than not, it involves you going out and getting to know people. And here's the part where it gets uncomfortable, as it is. The more you speak to people, like, oh, shit, man, you do realize there's so much more I don't know, and there's so much more happening in this world. And the world is such a, it's such a beautiful mix of different skill sets and different personalities and different individuals. So I think it's a fun place to be in.
Yeah, that makes things interesting, right? To just learn new things and see where things can go through by combining and fusion, putting things together in moving forward, right? Okay, so we are actually coming towards the end of the session. Just one last question, Naza.
Yep.
If you have a choice of words to put on a billboard, what would that message be? What would your message be to the world?
If you have the choice of words to put on the billboard, right, how would the best message be? I think be the best version of yourself. So with all my clients that I've worked with all the teams that I work with, whether it's individual or teams, I find that we have this tendency of wanting to benchmark with others and wanting to replicate what has worked in other spaces.
Right.
And adopt it almost one for one, you know. But often when we do that, we forget our own strengths, and we forgot that we're all on a journey towards our own goal. So whenever with clients, I always say, okay, let's go back to what's your strength? What can you do that others can't? So how can you be the best version of yourselves? So when you are really serious about being the best version of yourselves, you will come your own areas of strength. You recognize your own areas of weaknesses. You see your network as people that support you and love you, and people that you know you can rely on. And you also see learning as something that makes you better as an individual day in, day out. So if you are able to be the best version of yourselves, and always at the end of the year, right, look back, so what's my change narrative this year? How have I evolved this year as an individual? What will my change narrative be next year? How have I evolved to become a better person next year? You will find that you're no longer living a life that's stressful. You're not comparing yourself to others. So I think that's it. Be the best version of yourselves.
I like the fact that you're actually using your work, your change narrative, to actually reflect on yourself. That is actually a direct example of transferable skill, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I have learned a lot today, and I'm sure our audiences have learned a lot from Nazaruddin Niki Abdullah. And Naza, you are also a Toastmaster. Are you in any positions or any? Are you holding anything right now?
So here's the funny thing. I actually told myself this year I'm going to slow down. Like I really want to slow down. So I've managed to not hold any position, but for the upcoming Toastmasters International District 51 Annual Conference, I have been asked to assume the position of the Chief People Officer.
Oh,
so what it means is
congratulations.
For a group of 40 people, my role is ensure the team is happy, the team knows what they're supposed to do, and the team is continuously learning and also building their own skills, even as they contribute back to the 3,000 odd members of District 51. So that's currently my role currently. So the conference is in May. It's about 3 months' time. We have excellent speakers. We have Ulrika Brenner. We have Chris Erickson. Not sure if you know him. She's from Human Inc. Melrili Loon from, I think, Work Inspires is there as well. We have a few CHRO. Norlida Aziz, Norlida from Axiata is there. Nora from Maybank is there. So there's quite a number of big names that we're bringing to the conference. So Yazid, I'm expecting to see you there. So please sign up.
I'm also a Toastmaster member, but not just like you. I'm not too much of an active Toastmasters these days. But for our audiences who like to join to that conference, how do they get to join?
So just go over to the Facebook, look for District 51 Toastmasters International Annual Conference. What I'll do is later I'll drop you the link, Yazid, and you can just put it in the description of the podcast perhaps.
Will do.
Okay.
Right. Is it open to Toastmasters only or anyone?
Anyone, everyone, wherever you are. Yeah.
So ladies and gentlemen, if you like to know more about this, just go visit that website. You're going to see a lot of people just like Naza, inspirational speakers who have years and years experience, telling you to actually see how can you move forward in your life, right? So Naza, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot from you and audiences. I do hope you stay tuned for the next episode, because we're gonna have more speakers coming in, and it's gonna be great. Naza, thank you again for your time, and our audience, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Yazid signing off from the podcast.
Thank you, Yazid.
Have a good day.